Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this panel. I hope you had a nice lunch. I had that mac and cheese, which was pretty yummy, so thank you to our hosts. I know this is a panel on regulation, so please bear with us and don't have a nap now, but let's start with introductions to our panel, and please, on the end, we'll go with Andrew first.
Hi, thanks for having me here. My name is Andrea Zaragoza, and I'm partner at Bitcoin Frontier Funds. You've seen quite a few of our portfolio companies on stage today, so really proud of all of you. Shout out. Basically we're investing in startups building on Bitcoin, so the question on regulation and jurisdiction is one that often comes up in our conversations with them.
Thank you.
Afternoon, I'm Duncan from Aberdeen. We're probably, I guess, as TradFi as it gets in this room. We're a global asset manager, managing about $600 billion, and I run the digital asset strategy at the company. So we're doing a whole range of stuff from product to bring crypto to our investors, through using blockchain technology in the business and making strategic investments.
Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I was on a panel this morning, so I'll make it short. Mike Roberts. I head up the revenue division at Copper, crypto native custodian.
And finally, myself, moderator Ian Taylor. I represent Crypto UK, the trade association for the UK, representing 160 firms, pretty close to the policy in the reg space, and I also head KPMG's crypto and digital assets business. So I think we can safely say we've got a pretty wide, diverse panel here of folks both in the Stacks ecosystem, folks from traditional finance players, and also a crypto native doing great work in the custody space. So to quickly set the scene around the topic of today's panel, we'll focus on the UK and the US, and obviously there's other regions that are looking at how to regulate this sector. And I mean, this is obviously a Bitcoin event. And when I was thinking about how to write the intro, it seemed to me an oxymoron when you talk about regulation and Bitcoin, because when the white paper was released some 13 or so years ago, we all read that, and the idea is to create a peer-to-peer payment system that doesn't need any trust or doesn't need any party to support how the transactions and value transfers. But what I've seen in my short history of being involved in the reg space is when the ICO boom was happening back in 16 and 17, as a policymaker in a government, you have to take notice when consumer harms take place, fraud and scams take place. So what we try and do is work with government, work with regulators to make sure we get that balance of proportionate regulations. Hopefully we'll dive in to some of that today. And the UK has a policy to be a crypto innovation hub. This came out from the government last April. We also have regulatory clarity in the UK. It's not perfect, but regulation is a broad brush instrument. And then we can talk to the US. Andrea, her fund is set up there as to what the situation is looking like over there, and I'm sure we'll have a view on that. So first, let me open up the question to the floor here. Is the current unfriendly regulatory environment in the US a driver for the move for US entities to look to offshore in other jurisdictions? And perhaps maybe Michael, I'll start with you and then move along.
Yeah, sure. It's a bit sad. It's a bit of an own goal from the regulator in the US, really, because I say it's sad because the money's in the US, the big pools of capital are there, the innovation's there. Many people in the room are from the US. So what's gone on with regulation, particularly when you focus into the hedge funds and things like that, is they're very nimble. Hedge funds will move where the opportunity is, and what's happened in the last 12 to 18 months is they've just set entities up offshore. So where, maybe 12 months ago we were speaking to, most of the firms in the US, and that you could see even the 0.72s and the big firms in the space looking to get into crypto, and with, a tilt on Bitcoin, a lot of these firms have now set up offshore. So what does that mean for London? Focusing a little bit more on the title of the panel, London's got a rich history of taking advantage of these opportunities. So previously, this has happened with the derivatives market, it's happened with the FX market, wherever there's kind of a level of protectionism in the States, other jurisdictions will step up and try and innovate, and then, the States usually ends up, doing the right thing and then sucking all that business back and becoming, big as they ever are. But look, at the moment, everyone's moving offshore, particularly if you want to face the offshore derivatives exchanges. You can't do that in the US. Case in point is Coinbase opening up their derivatives exchange offshore. It just tells you everything you need to know.
So let me bring in Andrew now, having experienced the enforcement actions, well, not personally, but coming from that jurisdiction where we read every other week some sort of action coming out of a different agency. What's going on over there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us as a fund, I mean, we're established there. But I think where we really see the impact of what's happening at the regulatory level is with our startups, right? Like these are builders that are looking to build in the space, create, and one of the main questions, especially when they're getting started, is like, where do we set up where we're not gonna have to be dealing with complexities as we continue to evolve and grow? Especially at those early stages, the last thing you wanna be dealing with is having to uproot yourself and go somewhere else that's gonna be a little bit more friendly. So in this case, you know, it's having to be very strategic about what is it that you're looking for in terms of the jurisdiction and what are they offering. I think, you know, it's great that the UK is taking this stance, and it's definitely like a huge step in the right direction. And in US, you know, the challenge here is for startups to be well positioned, especially if they're going to be looking to fundraise. Like in the end, the funding ecosystem in the US, the VC ecosystem there is the largest. And so making sure that you are also taking into consideration, like, where are you going to be fundraising from? How is that going to play into your potential fundraising strategy? How will that position you in the eyes of investors is going to be a big question, while at the same time just navigating the regulatory ups and downs. And so in the US, it is a bit challenging at the moment, but I think in terms of how that plays out for Bitcoin, it's not a space that they're necessarily, you know, having in their crosshairs just now. So I think there's still an opportunity to figure out how this continues to evolve. You know, we're watching it carefully to see what's going to happen in the next few months, next few years as well. So I think, you know, it's balancing that out and looking at what some of the other options are and what are the pros and cons that you're going to be kind of playing with, especially at the early stage, and maybe even so when you're at the growth stage. You know, like, what are some of those challenges that you're going to be encountering later down the line? Because it's not only the US that's going through this. I think every single jurisdiction is trying to figure out exactly how they're going to position themselves and how it is that they're going to be favorable, but also figuring out, you know, where in the larger ecosystem they might fit in.
Yeah, you make a good point. The US is obviously the center for capital and has some huge opportunity for those that want to get funded, and we saw recently A16Z were looking to set up in the UK. In fact, you know, my life is not very exciting. I was at the party conferences advocating for the industry, and one of the policy guys from A16 was there advocating for the industry, which is good to see. All right, so unfortunately we don't have any questions from the audience, so do grab us after the panel if you want to speak to us. We're moving on to the second question. What does the panel see generally, not just domestically here in the UK, as the future for Bitcoin? Is it just an investment asset class? Is there more going on in the ecosystem that you're involved in at Stacks? Guys.
I don't mind going first. Look, from my kind of seat, I mentioned it earlier, it's considered, you know, one of the best forms of collateral in the digital asset space, and I think it'll continue to be that. Well, I should call it the number one form of collateral in the digital asset space. It's widely used, widely accepted, and, you know, lots of funds are designed around it. What I'm quite interested in, and that's why we support the Stacks integration, is it's, you know, protecting the Bitcoin, but then letting it circulate in different ways, so that the transfer of value or the store of value that, you know, Bitcoin creates has more utility. So, you know, for me, it's now pushing on to that next level of utility, which I do think Stacks and everything that's going on in the space will unlock.
So now, you know, we can create a bridge and park our Bitcoin over here and move it onto another chain, staked products, other ways to utilize the assets that we have.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, you know, probably a dirty word in the room, but look, you know, using some of the things that Ethereum have done to...
How dare you?
How dare you? To, you know, use Bitcoin in a smart way, you know, and, you know, just transfer value and access more markets.
Yeah.
And I guess as more groups, bigger firms come into the space, the liquidity of Bitcoin just gives it an extra leg over the rest of the market. I think just to come back on the the kind of first question, the one thing I would add to it is that it's very clear that, at least from an investment product perspective, financial institutions have not given up on the US, right? It's almost like everyone was sitting there with their finger over, the send, the click on send to send out filings, as soon as there's some positivity around a spot Bitcoin ETF or ETH ETF, it's very clear that firms still want to do business in the US if they think they're going to get stuff done. So I think the US should be reasonably comfortable with that once, if regulation kind of if they get it right, then there's going to be enough supply, or there's enough firms wanting to do business, and presumably they're only wanting to do business because they know there's demand there. Most of these firms are pretty good at assessing the market demand. BlackRock are not going to launch a product if they don't think that there's going to be demand. So I think it's almost like you have the two bits on either side, and you just need that small, insignificant bit of regulation in the middle to kind of get on board. And the US will be back to being at its best, I suppose.
Yeah, we can't discount the US. And at the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, what are the other use cases that you guys are looking at as opposed to buy the dip, hodl?
Yeah, I think it's exciting times on Bitcoin, as we're all here for that. I think right now, like what I like to say is that it's the Wild West of the Wild West, because the crypto space is still very new, as we all know, and there are still a lot of challenges to navigate. On Bitcoin in particular, we're excited to see more infrastructure being built. We're looking at some of the teams building like DeFi use cases, finding ways to bring both more liquidity, more adoption into the space. Everything's kind of needed at this moment. So we're in a tough position where we would like to, jump in on every single opportunity, but at the same time, having to be very mindful of where the market is at in terms of the adoption and what's going to be making sense at each moment. But yeah, you've seen some of the teams up here, as I mentioned earlier. They've gone through our accelerator program, and I think one of the biggest needs that we see from the founders, because in the end we consider ourselves kind of like a partner for founders as well, is having that support system to know how to navigate the space, because we are treading in two different worlds, right? We're treading in the Web3 crypto space, and we're also still having to navigate a jurisdiction regulatory space that still has very much a solid foot in the traditional finance space, right? So having someone that can help you navigate those two, I think, is going to be crucial. And bringing it back to just understanding how there are different jurisdictions and how each one kind of plays their own role, and to the point that there's still a lot of funds and a lot of firms that are looking to do business within the U.S. There are limitations, of course. Like, this is an innovative space. They're figuring it out. In the US in particular, I think it's an economy that has been established for a while, so it's a little bit slower to catch up. And we see like other jurisdictions that might be a bit newer, that are more easy, to adopt and looking to be more innovative and position themselves well. So some of the spaces where we've seen particular interest, have been like Singapore. Dubai is definitely one of the jurisdictions that has been catching a lot of attention recently. There's Hong Kong as well. So, bringing back to the jurisdiction question, it's kind of balancing out those like pros and cons and figuring out exactly what you're building, because I think depending on what you're building and how you're planning on transacting and what you're offering, that's also going to determine where you should or shouldn't look into. But I think the US is still going to be in the picture. And it's great to see economies like the UK, which is one of these like older established economies, taking some of these like leaps and bounds and trying to adapt quickly.
That's actually a nice follow-on question for the panel, actually. And this is something, in my role at Crypto UK, where we work with many different jurisdictions, not just other trade associations representing the industry, but also intergovernmental standard setters. What do you guys see is a place that's got it right? If you were starting out from scratch and your CEO said to you, where should we set up? What do you guys think is a good place right now?
Look, Singapore was mentioned. That's a location that does make sense. We are set up in Switzerland at the moment just because they're a little bit more forward-thinking, and our product suite, staking, custody, clear loop, some of the things we do, they have a framework where we can cover our full product set with, some form of guarantee that nothing's going to change. The UK is moving to the right spot, but it's an AML KYC license at the moment, which they're going to enhance later, looking, I guess, at what Mika have done. So it takes you nicely through too. Surprisingly, the EU have probably got one of the more kind of clear frameworks that comes into place next year. So I suspect the UK is going to do something like that, maybe a little bit better, who knows, but the EU has a very strong framework when that comes into play.
Duncan, do you have
I mean, maybe given the way that we're set up as a business, ADG Abu Dhabi would be given the kind of, big institutional, decent regulation, decent environment. But I mean, with the crypto asset regs from the last consultation, those are followed through. Yeah, the UK looks much more streamlined to get your permissions that you need, or the problem's still might be, can you get a bank account, depending on what you want to do, but that's
a huge problem.
That will follow.
Yeah, no, that's a huge problem for crypto firms in the UK, getting banking relationships. I won't bore you with that. We're at the Bitcoin event. So, I mean, let's talk about adoption. And the two sort of go hand in hand. Regulatory clarity breeds adoption. But do we need lots of the activities or market participants being regulated? Generally, one thing we've always advocated for is, regulate the entity, the on and off ramp, obviously not the technology. And we've had a lot of discussions with entities when it comes to anti-money laundering around do not define a personal wallet as a crypto asset entity, a VASP in the terminology of the Financial Actions Task Force. So how do we get to 1 billion users? How do we get institutional adoption, which is something that I know that's one of the major offerings at Copper, is to provide infrastructure to institutions, and at Aberdeen, a huge asset manager, insurance company. Like when are you going to allow your clients to invest in Bitcoin? Like, how do we get there? Yeah.
On the institutional adoption side of things, I mean, look, it's a Bitcoin conference, and you can go back to the innovation that Bitcoin brought to bear. So the finality of settlement is a very, very interesting thing that can be used in crypto, but then adopted in the traditional space. So a real-world example is our product, that Clearloop, that connects to the exchanges so that you can keep your assets off exchange. We actually do 4-hour settlements constantly, 24/7, 365 with the exchanges to clear down the risk in the system. And that happens relentlessly, and we have 12 people globally doing that, a risk team and a middle office team. Now, you can't do that in traditional finance, and if anyone's watched the GameStop movies and everything, you remember the scene where Robin Hood had the margin call, couldn't cover their margin call, had to go to the investors. Bitcoin, the innovation of Bitcoin, the finality of settlement has shown a different way to do that. So, last month, I think the number was 8,275 settlements, risk-reducing settlements we did across the market with 8 exchanges, hundreds of clients. Bitcoin did that, right? So we need to now show the traditional space, look, whether you use Bitcoin rails or something different, that innovation kicked all that off. So they've created a movie about Citadel and Robin Hood and firms nearly going under. Well, if you actually use these rails in the right way, and I come from the institutional side of things, it can really change the way things are done. And then you've got the adoption in on the retail side. I mean, it's not my arena. I'll let others speak on that, but you have to delineate. Too often the two worlds are kind of blended together, and then you don't get the right outcomes. So that would be my view on it. There's a lot to learn in this space. It's now up to us to go back to the traditional space and say, listen, forget all the scandal, forget all the things that went wrong, look at this one thing here that could change everything. So the crypto market's 1 trillion, I think the derivatives market is 2 quadrillion, right? So that's the innovation that Bitcoin brought that could change the way finance is done.
For my part, I mean, it's actually pretty simple. Asset managers or investment firms either manage funds or they manage segregated mandates for large institutional clients. If the fund is going to be sold to an individual investor in the UK, we cannot put crypto in it. right now because it counts as a crypto derivative, and you can't sell that on to retail. It's as simple as that. So until that reg changed, we can't put that into any of our funds. On the custom mandates, we can put that in whenever a client wants. And what I can say now is that I'm getting more and more inbound inquiries from our large institutional clients for education, views on the market, not on use of blockchain, on specifically investing in crypto. So that tells me that they're starting to see this as potentially a thematic part, an opportunistic part of the portfolio, and it always starts small before it begins to get adopted. They're seeing this maybe alongside, I don't know, an AI ETF or a metaverse ETF or something like that. Small, but it will grow.
Right, so we've got innovation. From Mike, we got all retail products and education. Andrew, what do you think we also could have in addition to that to help adoption?
I mean, I 100% agree that there's the education components. In our case, I'd like to think of ourselves as, again, 1 foot in the Web 2 space, one foot in the Web 3 crypto Bitcoin space, particularly when, talking to other potential investors that are looking to Bitcoin. I think there's a lot of interest. If you haven't been keeping up, there's a lot of interest from VC in particular to enter the Bitcoin space. They've been participating in some of the other chains, and so seeing what's happening here has definitely perked up their ears, and they're just needing to get a little bit more involved. So invite them to these kinds of events so that they can get a sense of what is happening. So education, I think there's definitely more awareness and understanding, especially for those that might be more in the traditional investment end. How can they get into the space? What makes sense for them to start dipping their toes? And I think that just comes with also starting to get involved in spaces like this to really understand it. I think we're all trying to figure it out as we go. There are some great communities, such as the Stacks community, that really provide a lot of support and education and awareness around it. But yeah, I think it's just being able to have those conversations. I mean, I was mentioning earlier, going to some of the other events in the space that are not Bitcoin focused. When you mention Bitcoin, there's still the majority of people don't know that any of this is even possible on Bitcoin, right? So starting to have those conversations, one person at a time, one conversation at a time, but I think at larger scale, also being able to, open the doors and bring more people into the fold and have these conversations.
Yeah, I like the answers there. The innovation is something that we advocate for at government level. Not just only the instantaneous settlement, which removes a number of the frictions you spoke about with what happened with GameStop regarding collateral management, and also increased speed and reduced costs and time to settle. I mean, in the last few minutes here, I'm going to ask everyone to talk about the price of Bitcoin. No, I'm not. We promised we won't do that. But maybe just a cheeky question around crystal ball. Where do you folks see the Bitcoin ecosystem in a medium-term horizon, say 5 to 10 years? And I'm going to start on the end where we started, if I may.
All right. I mean, for me, I'd like to say, we have this conversation on our team all the time, and it's okay, maybe we're 3 years behind where we see Ethereum and what has happened there. Maybe we're 5 years, trying to figure out where that is. But just seeing how quickly the space evolves, and especially, the Bitcoin renaissance that everyone's talking about in the Bitcoin space, seeing the interest, the community, the hype behind it. I mean, I'd like to say that in a couple of years, especially with the Bitcoin halving coming and some of these other signals that are in the space that I think are going to, provide us with a good push. I think within a couple of years, we can, start to see a little bit more adoption, more momentum, and start to see things picking up a little bit more.
For my part, I guess the boring kind of finance view is, I think Bitcoin is like the Apple or the S&P of the crypto world. So at a minimum, it's going to be the proxy for what we think will be a growing industry. We're big believers in public blockchain, and if Bitcoin is the proxy for that, then it's up and to the right, as they say.
Thank you. And
As I've mentioned previously, I mean, we see the value of it as collateral, and we just see that growing and growing. So we have offices in Singapore, offices in America. It's vibrant down in South America, etc. So institutionally, we see the adoption growing. Tilting to something of a more kind of sad sentiment, but geopolitically, the world's in a bit of a tough state at the moment, particularly the sad events in the Middle East. And I think things like that are going to drive adoption more at the kind of stacks and the retail level. It's an escape valve for when you're in a very, very tough situation. And if the world's going to carry on in the course that it's currently playing out, which is not good for any of us, I think Bitcoin gives everyone an escape valve. So I see institutional adoption growing, but actually as a side kind of thing, it's probably helping some of these very sad situations in a way that was never available before Bitcoin was invented.
Yeah, being used what it was originally designed for as a
correct
payment. It would be unfair if I didn't give my crystal ball view asking you folks. So I was thinking about a number of discussions we've had recently, especially at the government level. We get asked all the time, Bitcoin, what value does it add? It just burns the amount of energy that Switzerland does in any given period of time. But one thing that I see happening today, and so in 5 years' time, actually the mining industry, the Bitcoin mining industry, is actually driving a lot of development in better hardware, ASIC chips, and in fact bringing down the cost of producing renewable energy. That is then transferring back into the traditional energy systems, especially in places like Texas and the US. Not so much here domestically in the UK because energy costs a truckload and it doesn't really make sense economically to mine here, right?
But I mean, you touch on an interesting point, and that's what I was trying to get across earlier, is there's this misnomer about mining and the inefficiency and the cost of mining. In a bank, if you're trying to do those margin calls, you can do them once a day, and there's hundreds of people doing it, right? It's inefficient. You're doing that with 8 people, and it's because of the innovation of Bitcoin and the way it works. So, when you're measuring the utility of Bitcoin, what everyone needs to wise up with in its education is some of these things where you've got, people passing value around and reconciliations and all these things, they all drop away. And that has to be verified some way. That's what the mining does. So it's a lack of understanding, and once that bridge is crossed, you can actually see, all those benefits unleashed.
All right, well, unleashed, that's the word of the day. That's perfectly concluded. So all that remains is for me to thank the panel. Please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.